that struggle that I still have to this day as I sit here between being a quiet professional and being a silent professional. And by creating a book and putting myself out there, am I violating this oath that I've sworn to uphold? Welcome to Objective Secure. This episode I'm excited to discuss. In this episode, we're going to talk about how I actually wrote this book, the process I went through to turn a concept into a reality. We did a previous episode on the genesis of Objective Secure, how it actually came to be. So I recommend checking that out. This is more about the strategy, the actual step-by-step process that I went through to bring this to market. The original concept, that being a 9-page Microsoft Word document, is what I had. And once I decided to use that to write an actual book, I essentially used that as my outline. It wasn't structured like a typical outline is, but I had something to go off of. And that product was purely the guide that I used. It was phase 1, phase 2, step 1, step 2, a sequence of events within time and space. Retrospectively analyzed to create this book, and that's really where I began the process of writing this. Was I went back to that outline and I just began adding more. I began adding more detail to these principles. I began adding more after conducting more reflection, after looking into my training logs, into my journals. I began just diving in deeper to these different tenets and principles. And I began learning myself about these principles. So discipline, structure, focus, intent. Through research and then internal reflection, which was fueled by the objective data that I had been collecting over the years, I began to gain more of an understanding of these different tenets and principles and began documenting what I was learning as I was learning it. Once I got the guide portion of this book to where I felt was a good stopping point, at that point is when I went back to the beginning and began thinking about what was I experiencing when I recognized the importance of this particular principle. What have I been through that demonstrated the need for this thing? Because without it, I would have been unsuccessful at this particular task, or I would have been unsuccessful at reaching this next objective. So then I began adding the personal examples, the vignettes that are also within the text. And that's really how the book is broken down as you move from section 1 to section 2, from start to finish. There's the general guidance, the general recommendations, the general knowledge about these character traits and ways to live your lives, coupled with or several personal examples to give that particular principle some context and some credibility, and to be able to put the reader at least somewhat in the shoes that I was in when I recognized the value of this particular concept and or when I employed this particular concept. and the results of that. Once I got enough of the personal examples built within that, I got to a decent word count. I think at that point I was probably somewhere around 65,000, 70,000 words. Then I began filtering this out to a small team of advisors, people that I trust, people whose opinion I value. These were family members, friends, colleagues, maybe 5 or 6 individuals. I just sent them the raw script. Microsoft Word doc, boom. Send that out to just get some feedback. So over the course of a couple weeks, this team provided that feedback to me. And it was things as simple as sentence structure and grammar, English literature type stuff, all the way to actual content. Hey, I think you may want to add a little bit more stuff here. I think you may want to explain this principle a little bit more here. I don't think I quite have enough of a grasp of it, or I'd like a little bit more detail here, or hey, I think you can actually scale this back and trim some fat off of this. The goal from the beginning was to make this thing as lean as possible. No fluff. Every single word is put in there deliberately. My team, my advisory crew, was able to provide that feedback I needed. Well, once I had that, once I found like I had around a 90% solution, 95% solution, where I knew I wasn't going to add anymore, that was when I began working through the DoD approval process. So because I'm active duty, anything that we publish to go out into the world has to be approved by the Department of Defense. And there is a section at the Pentagon, a team of individuals that's all they do, is they review publications or aspiring publications prior to them being released. And they're mostly concerned about operational security. Is there anything in there that's going to pose a threat to what we're doing as an organization or as a government? That process was extraordinarily tedious. And, as a service member, you start things at the lowest level. So my process began very rudimentary. And I had 70,000 words on paper. And I walked into our intel section at work because I knew I needed to get this thing reviewed to ensure that this wasn't compromising operational security, national security, or any classified or compartmented information. So I walk into the office and I run into some, E3 behind the desk and I say, hey, private so-and-so, I wrote a manuscript and I need to get it reviewed to make sure that I'm cleared to publish this thing. And he looks back at me clueless. And he's like, okay, I don't really know how to do that. I'm like, okay, which is fine. So then just began the real tedious and monotonous climbing of the ladder, up and up and up. And this isn't exactly a common thing that our staff personnel, our support personnel do on a day-to-day basis. So I can understand the confusion. I understood not knowing exactly what right looked like. So it just became a telephone game and an email game, working my way up. Nope, hit a roadblock, move over this channel, work up that, finally get to someone who has an idea as to what right looks like, because I was committed to doing this thing the right way. There was no way I was going to release this until I had the approval from every level of chain of command that was required, in writing, cleared hot, good to go. Had no idea how long that was going to take. It ended up taking around 4 or 5 months before it was cleared by all echelons of my leadership and then ultimately at the Department of Defense. Once I had that done, so now I'm given the green light. And I'll say that I was extraordinarily deliberate as I was writing this, extraordinarily sensitive to keeping information that needs to be maintained close hold out of this text. At the DoD review, I got the final approved version sent back to me, and it had one acronym redacted. Out of 70,000 words, there was a single acronym that the DoD said, you have to change this. And it was an acronym used for one of our higher end units, we'll say. And what's ironic about that and what's funny about that is as I was writing this, that single acronym was the most researched acronym I did for any other word or anything else that was in this text. I researched this thing 10 different ways. What is the approved way to annotate this particular thing? Which is ironic because that was the one thing that I had to change. So I came out of the gate. I was successful at keeping this thing as an open source document that could be shared without posing a threat to any organization or individual. So once the DoD came back and said, okay, you're good to move forward with this, you're good to publish this, then I began looking at options on how do I actually provide this product to those that are interested. I decided early on that I wanted to self-publish. And in today's world, that is a relatively simple process. 50 years ago, if you wanted to publish something, you were going through a traditional publisher. Nowadays, that's no longer a requirement. And some authors decide to go that route. There's no wrong answer. I decided that I wanted to self-publish because I was confident that I could do that myself with some assistance. But most importantly, I didn't want to relinquish any creative control over my product, over my piece of art. I am going to bring this out the way I want it to look, the way I want it to feel. I was unwilling to accept anything less than that, regardless of any kind of advance that I may be paid, irrelevant to any royalty splits. This is mine. I'm going to own it. And my team and I are going to send it as is, and we'll accept the successes or the failures that come with it. After conducting several hours of research on how to bring a book, how to bring a manuscript, really, to market as a book, we decided to onboard some assistance. We decided to onboard a self-publishing consultant, which is actually quite a big sector nowadays because a lot of authors want to do what we did. They want to write something. They want someone to help them turn it into what looks like a book, and they want to send it. That's the route that we went. Entirely paid up front. You pay for a service. They provide you that service. They don't own anything on the back end of this. They have no say over what's inside, what it looks like, the topics, nothing. You hire someone solely to assist you with these different tasks that you may choose you need. We decided we needed some editing, so a professional editor to go through, which we had done. We needed someone to assist with the formatting, so taking a whole bunch of words on a Microsoft Word document and formatting it in a way that actually looks like a book. And then lastly was assistance in bringing it to market, meaning actually making it available on Amazon. So we hired a service to do that. That service is My Word Publishing. We worked with a guy named Rich Wolf and his wife, Victoria Wolf, who I recommend taking a look at if you are in the position of looking to self-publish. More than happy with the service that we got from them. They were great. And that brings me to my last point here, is those that are interested in publishing a book. Creating this, writing it, running it up the channels for approval, vocalizing it to my teammates and other members of my unit It's been an interesting ride. And this is something that I've talked about in other episodes and in other pieces of content. That struggle that I still have to this day as I sit here between being a quiet professional and being a silent professional. And by creating a book and putting myself out there, am I violating this oath that I've sworn to uphold? There were mixed opinions about the project that I had committed to. So I decided I was doing this. I knew my intent. I know my values. I know my character. And I was willing to accept any negative feedback that came from anybody. And I would respect that opinion because I understand it. In the earlier phases of this, leading up to it being published, and then once it was published, there were mixed opinions. It was overwhelmingly, the majority was positive. Hey man, this is great. Congratulations. Thank you for the work you did. This is awesome. It was really positive. There was a small demographic, a small group of people that just thought that this was a mistake, which again, I respect that opinion. I understand that opinion. Fast forward to today, about 9 months since we published this. In that amount of time, I've probably had now 36 individuals within the special operations community reach out to ask me, hey man, how did you do this? How did you write it? Because I'm thinking about writing something myself. And while it's tough to rack and stack the different ways in which I have been impacted by creating this, that may be at the top. That may be at the top. It just demonstrates such an impressive level of growth, independent growth, and these absolute savage warriors, many of which I have shared the battlefield with dozens and dozens of times, that have done some absolutely unfathomable things on behalf of this country and on behalf of his teammates. Warriors who are now considering putting pen to paper, allowing themselves to become vulnerable, willing to take that same risk that I took for the sake of their own therapeutic value in getting that out and providing value from their experiences. The last 20 years, since 9/11 in the military sector, in the military industry, there has been some amazing people that have done some amazing things. This goes far beyond the special operations community. And the thought of so many lessons learned through blood and sweat and tears and pain and discomfort and failure and fear. So many valuable lessons learned for the next generation. Hell, for today's generation. The thought of all of those dying, never being captured, never being recorded, never being documented, and just letting it simply die with that individual or those individuals would just be an absolute tragedy. And to hear that there are guys that live the same lifestyle I do, that have now for years, that are willing to take that risk and put in the work to create something to be able to pass that knowledge on, is just so rewarding for me. That right there alone makes the late nights and the early mornings and the willingness to take that risk myself and assume that criticism to create this, that right there makes all of that 100% worth it. To say that I'm proud of these teammates of mine, these colleagues of mine, these other warriors would be a drastic understatement. Those of us in service, particularly going through the global war on terror, we've lived history. In many sense, and in many cases, we have an obligation to extract the lessons we've learned by doing so and providing it to those alongside us, and most importantly, in my opinion, those coming up behind us. That's the process. It certainly sounds easy. I can assure you it's not. Writing is challenging for most of us, but I challenge anyone out there. I challenge you. If you have an idea, if you have a story, if you have a message, there is a way in which you can pass that on to the next generation.